Now this knock is looking really good. It's almost complete. Like I said, I'm going to come in here with my rat tail file and I'm going to kind of round off that little square edge just to make everything blend in a little bit more. But at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start hollowing out this tail end, or the tip end, excuse me, the tip end of my shaft. And I'm going to use two tools. I'm going to use my Swiss tool. I have this nice awl on it. And I'm also going to use a sharpened stick, a piece of arrowweed, to start digging out that pith. And I'm also going to start chewing in slowly on the sides of this shaft right here. So I'll start off and I'll just place it directly in the center, and I'll just start working the shaft around. Now, back in traditional times, a lot of Indians, what they would use is a bone tool. They would use a sharp piece of bone, and they would lay that on the ground. They would take the shaft, place it in the bone, and a lot like the hand drill, they would just drill down into the material. But the Swiss tool makes things a little bit easier. If you're at home, you can use a drill. Either one will work. I like to use hand tools because I'm careful. And again, I like to work slow. I like to inspect everything every few minutes. And the Swiss tool seems to do quite a good job. We have a little beveled end on this awl, so you can get in there and you can start digging out the wood. Makes it a little bit easier. So I'm actually going to hollow this out about 2.5 inches. And really what you want is you want this to be hollowed out the same length of the rat tail portion of your foreshaft once we start shrinking this down. And we want a friction fit. We don't want this to be too tight to where the foreshaft can't release, but we also don't want it too loose for when we place our arrow upside down, the foreshaft just releases. We want a real happy medium, and the way to really obtain that is by doing so. You got to constantly practice this, and you got to constantly get the dirt time experience and figure out what works and what doesn't work. And as you go, you'll obtain that, and you'll get better at it. Just like I did. I've been making arrows for quite some time now, and I've gotten to the point where I can look at it and I can figure out, you know, what needs to go where and what end needs to be filed down. And again, it's all through experience and hands-on training. So I'll continue to hollow this out, and once I'm done, I'll be ready to set my sinew. Now the reason we want to use sinew to seat this hollowed out portion is so we can prevent any cracking and splitting once we start inserting the foreshaft into this tail shaft. See, what happens is we can leave it raw and exposed, but when we start getting a friction fit, we can start to get cracking up top, and we don't want that, because if this thing starts cracking, that's a waste of 2 inches on this shaft. And this shaft is fairly short, so it's for a shorter draw bow, and that really wouldn't be good. So we want to make sure we take the appropriate measures to seat this nice and secure. And I use backstrap sinew. You can use leg sinew, that'll work too, but backstraps, you can really break these down to real fine individual threads. And see, what sinew does is once it's saturated and it's wet with saliva or even hide glue, it'll expand, and once it dries, it shrinks, thus putting more friction onto this wood, and it'll really make that wood nice and tight, nice and compact, and it'll grip into the wood. So that'll ultimately, again, prevent any cracking or splitting. It'll help prevent it, I should say. So I'll start off by taking the sinew, and I'll just get a little bit wet with saliva, and then I'll take the entire strand and I'll just chew on it a little bit. I'll just let it react to the saliva. Again, I don't let this sit in water. Some folks do that, but what I find is the sinew reacts best to saliva. And this strand is nice and long. You can see how long this back strap gets. This thing is probably a good 10 inches. And on a dry, hot day like it is today, you want to really saturate this stuff because it dries out fast. Now, I have had some questions regarding artificial sinew in the past, and some beginners will ask me if they can use artificial sinew with this process, and the answer is no. Again, the artificial sinew, being it's a synthetic fiber, it won't expand and it won't react to your saliva like a natural sinew does. And this has a natural adhesive to it. As a matter of fact, when you submerge it in your mouth and you take your teeth and you barely bite down, you don't want to bite down and chew on it to where it splits the fiber. But if you bite down on it slightly, it won't damage it. But you can actually feel the natural adhesive on your teeth. And I'll just wrap this all the way around, and I'll follow this down for a good 2.5 inches. And this stuff is nice and thin, nice long strips. This works perfect for this process, and it also works well for fletching my feathers. So again, I'll just take it and I'll break it down to a nice thin individual strand. Run it across my mouth a few times, then I'll submerge it in saliva again. Alright, so this is now complete. As you can see, we sinew wrapped it for about 2.5 inches, and this thing is looking good here. We followed these tag ends around. We don't have any gaps, so at this point I want to let the sinew cure for a couple of hours, and then after that we can start working on our foreshaft and get a nice friction fit into this hollowed out section.